Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hardy Bucks podcast. Today I have a very special guest, and this man lives in the jungle and deals with some of the most dangerous animals on the planet. Prehistoric creatures that have been around since the dawn of time, often seen in much bigger sizes, I'd imagine. But my next guest is Adam Britton, one of the world's leading herpetologists. Very welcome to the show, Adam. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me, Martin.
Now, before we kick off, I have a funny little anecdote for you, Adam. Yesterday, I went to see one of the world's leading orthodontist specialists in root canals, and he was doing a checkup on my teeth. And he said, "Yeah, they look fine. That looks like your healing is on course." And I said, "You know what, Vincent? You're a very interesting man, and I'd like to also have you as a guest on the podcast." And he was like, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "Tomorrow, I'm going to have one of the world's leading herpetologists on." Oh, excellent. And he started talking about the trimerge neuralgia, which is you have three nerves that run from your brain into your face, and they control your face muscles. So he got talking about these nerves that run from the face. And then I asked about Bell's palsy, which is when one half of your face stops working. And then he goes, well, that basically comes from chickenpox, which leads into shingles. And after you get shingles... So he gave me a 15-minute lecture on shingles and chickenpox being of the herpes family. And he thought that I was interviewing one of the world's leading researchers in herpesology. So I said, no, this guy does, he works with crocodiles and snakes and that kind of thing. Oh, God. Oh, well, that'll make a funny story. So that's the story there for you.
This is why I tell people I'm a zoologist. It's a lot simpler.
A zoologist, yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, and then, of course, they think, oh, so you work in a zoo. Like, no, zoo means animals, so I work on animals. So yeah.
Whereabouts are you from originally yourself? I detect, is it Stoke?
No.
Around the Midlands?
No, I come from West Yorkshire. I come from a little place called Wakefield.
Oh, Wakefield. There's a band called the Cribs that are from Wakefield.
Yeah, there's quite a music scene there, actually. And I went to university in Leeds, and there's obviously a big music scene there too. So, yeah, that's my home.
Did you ever hear of the Bridewell Taxis, Adam?
No, I don't think so.
There's a band, Bridewell Taxis. I was doing a gig in Leeds for St. Patrick's weekend, and there's a fella called Mick Roberts who's in a band called Bridewell Taxis, and they were big, and he was touring with Stone Roses, and he ended up getting like an ear infection where he lost his hearing. So I was being introduced by a friend of mine, Johnny Crow, and he goes, "Martin," and Johnny's from Leeds as well, and he goes, "Martin, this is Mick." And I went, "How are you, Mick? How are things?" "Yeah, mate, yeah." I asked him a question, and he didn't. The poor guy couldn't hear me, but he was a legend. But I digress. So you went from Leeds, and you're now living in Darwin in Australia.
Yeah, I did my degree in Leeds. Then I lived in Hong Kong for a short period of time, which was an interesting experience. Then I went to Leeds. Then I went down to Bristol. And I did my PhD down in Bristol. And then after that, I came to Darwin, originally for 1 year just to, see what life was like over here. And that was 22 years ago. So I fell in love with the place.
And like since you were a child, was I suppose reptiles and crocodiles something that you've been interested in? And if so, what was your first moment where you decided, I'm crazy about these things?
I remember having a book on dinosaurs, and of course, the last few pages of this book were about the living dinosaurs, as it called them, and it was talking about crocodiles. And of course, we know crocodiles are not dinosaurs, but back then, when you're 6 years old, this is pretty inspirational stuff. So, I thought, well, I could be studying fossils and dusty bones, or I could study the living animals. So that was kind of the seed, I think, that implanted itself in my head.
My first ever memories of seeing crocodiles, I think I was about maybe 3 or 4, and I was with my dad in Chester Zoo. and there was just a massive, big green crocodile in an enclosure and a smaller one beside it. And my young brain was just like, it was fascinated by these things. And ever since then, I was obsessed with crocodiles, especially.
Well, I remember visiting, I can't remember which zoo it was, to be honest, but it was the first time, it was part of a school group, and we went behind the scenes in the reptile house, and they had this little baby crocodile. And I remember them handing me this little baby crocodile. And for me, that was like, if someone passes you a little baby Tyrannosaurus Rex, for example, you'd be like, oh, it's just that same electrical energy sort of went through me. And I think as soon as that happened, that was like the spark that said, okay, these are awesome. I want to work on these animals. And so as I got older, I got more interested in conservation. I've always been interested in animal behavior, but I also got interested in the relationship between people and animals. And I was fascinated by the idea that people and crocodiles could get along and live together. And so that ultimately is what brought me here to Northern Australia, because they seem to have solved that problem here. So I wanted to come and figure out how they'd done it.
They seem to have a bit of difficulty with that in the Philippines, and I think it was an article I read. It was a story about a tragic incident involving a boy who was taken by a saltwater crocodile in the Philippines from his dad's fishing boat, and I think some of the natives in the Philippines were complaining about the conservational efforts that were overlapping with their fishing territories as well, but. I suppose the Philippines would have. I can't remember the name of the saltwater crocodile that they took out recently, a few years ago, but it ended up dying because it was in on a concrete slab.
Yeah,
basically.
that was Lolong.
Lolong, that's the one.
I went over and measured him. So,
and what was his full size?
He was 6.17 meters.
6.17
from the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail. So that was a very impressive creature.
If we can put that into something that people can grasp in terms of size comparison, that would probably be longer than a BMW 7 Series. A lot longer.
Yes, a lot longer. I'm not familiar with the length of cars, to be honest. But I've got a Land Cruiser outside, for example, and it's about just under 5 meters. So it's even longer than that by over a meter. But it's hard to express the scale of this thing. And when I was sitting on the back of this, we sedated it, obviously, in order to try and measure it. When I was sitting on the back of this thing, I distinctly remember thinking to myself, 12-year-old me touching that little baby crocodile, wanting to work on dinosaurs, would have been just blown away by this experience. And, that was I think that's the closest I've ever come, or will ever come, to an actual dinosaur, apart from birds, of course, which we all know are dinosaurs. But, the concept that we have of what a dinosaur is, crocs sort of fit that quite nicely.
And also you have, in terms of, I suppose I have a section where I wanted to ask you about massive crocodiles. So we may as well get to the juicy bit in that respect. There was also the legendary Gustav, the Nile crocodile. Is it Rwanda he's based?
Yeah, no one's seen Gustav for many years now. And they think, he may have just moved out of the area, he may have been killed. But the trouble with Gustav is that no one ever measured him.
Right.
And when it comes to big crocodiles, there are many legends about giant crocodiles, and they're all because people see these animals and they're just blown away by the size of them, because they have no concept of a 5 or a 6 meter crocodile. And a 6 meter croc can look like a 8 meter croc or a 9 meter croc. So I suspect Gustav wasn't quite as big as people thought that he might have been, certainly based on some of the footage that we saw. But he was no doubt a big croc.
You can obviously use scaling in order to make something look bigger. And if he was beside, let's say, a 5-foot croc, which would be under 2 meters, of course he's going to look monolithic. And that's something when I went to. For me, it was a real dream come true. A couple of years ago, I went to Gatorland in, I know it's only entry level, it's closed captivity, but there's a guy called Brendan who worked there and another guy called Tim Boyle from Boston. and they just seen the excitement on my face when they were kind of exhibiting this croc, and they were like, "Hey, where are you from?" And I'm from Ireland, and they were like, "Hey, Irish, do you want to jump on the croc?" And I was like, "For real?" So like I sat on this alligator's back, and it wasn't that big. It's probably about 5.5 feet. But I just remember it wasn't anything like I'd expected it to be. And he's telling me that it's 90, I think it's 98% muscle. There's very little body fat. But I remember its head was so cold and hard. Like there's no flesh between the skin and the top of the skull. And I just remember I was impressed at how soft its skin was as well.
Yeah.
So that was the first introduction I had. But when they had albino gators and yeah, when I looked at them, I seen that they were big, but they didn't, like, some of them were like 18 feet long, and I'm still going in imperial. Sorry if anyone's confused by this, but they didn't look as big as I expected them to look.
What, an 18-foot one?
Yeah, I was like, I could see it was big, but I was like, it wasn't as massive as I'd thought. And then I went down to a place in the Everglades called Wootton's, where I met this guy called Gator John, who was an interesting character.
Uh-huh.
And again, he could see the excitement, and he had this whole pit just full of alligators. And he goes, "Hey, you want to come in and feed the gators?" I'm like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." So he had chicken thighs on the bone, and we were pulling them out of the bucket and throwing them into the gators. And all I could see was just these mouths, these rows of teeth with all slime and everything all over them and mud staring at me. And I was like, wow, they're not as hospitable as I'd thought in my head, you know.
Yeah.
And I turned my back on them to go and grab another chicken wing, and he goes, "Don't ever turn your back on them, man. Don't ever do that." And I was like, "Oh, sorry." He goes, "You would be sorry." And I said, "Have you ever had any close calls?" And he goes, "Yeah, if it wasn't for these Kevlar boots I had, those son of bitches would have dragged me right into the water." So yeah, it gave me like a new respect. But when I was down in the Everglades, I was just so excited. Like I'd be driving around, and I'd stop at every river and looking over the bridge and see if I could see. But they have a thing, I think it's called like Sharks Bay or something. It's a park that has like a boardwalk that runs through it.
Yeah.
But like gators are one thing, but what you're dealing with is saltwater crocodiles, which are the most fearsome on the planet.
Yeah, they're pretty aggressive. They have a very different demeanor to alligators. You can stand in front of an alligator and be reasonably safe. You can't stand in front of a saltwater crocodile and be reasonably safe. Not unless it's incredibly fat and can hardly move itself forwards, which some of them are in these zoos.
Like,
but no, I mean a wild saltwater croc. I mean, being on the receiving end of a wild croc trying to get rid of me, that you really start to get an appreciation for just how fast they can move and just how potent they are. And one of the other things that's always interested me is the spiritual relationship that people have or have had with crocodiles. So you look at the Aztecs and you look at the Egyptians and the Aboriginal traditional owners here as well, and a lot of them have got these very strong spiritual bonds with crocodiles, and you can understand that when you experience them. You can feel that power, if you like, and you can, you think, oh yeah, I can, I can see that this animal inspires fear and respect.
Well, it's also because it's unseen and it's stealthy and it's patient in terms of how it hunts. And also, like, sometimes I get dreams about crocodiles because I'm crazy about crocodiles and large reptiles. But there's also an allegorical meaning to seeing crocodiles in your dreams as well, which means that you're aware of a hidden danger or something that's not right in your life. And if you dream about crocodiles in your dream, it links into there's something unseen that you're picking up on in your daily life. And that's like an allegorical indication of there's something there that you need to fix. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. But I had a question from Cairnsey, a lad on my Discord group, and he asked, is it true that the Egyptians used to mummify crocodiles and their kings or royal family would be buried with them?
Yes, it is true. There are actually, the Egyptians built temples to crocodiles. There was a famous one.
Sobek.
There was the famous temple was called Kom Ombo. And yeah, the temple was, it was built to worship Sobek, who was a god who basically helped the souls through the underworld. And in order to try and butter Sobek up, as it were, they kept these crocodiles and they adorned them with, all kinds of fantastic foods and fine meats and jewels. And then when they died, they would mummify them.
Oh, wow.
There was a city as well called Crocodilopolis, which is in the province of Fayum. It doesn't exist anymore, just the ruins of it. But just imagine building an entire city dedicated to the worship of crocodiles and the crocodile god. But there was a recent news story just the other day, actually, and it was suggesting that from analysis of some of these mummies, the Egyptians were actually go and catch wild crocodiles and they would sacrifice them and mummify them for Sobek. So, not only did they sacrifice the animals that they were looking after, but they went out and got even more to sacrifice as well. And, they'd mummified little baby ones that big all the way up to big 5-meter adult males.
Yeah, I can't contain how excited I am about this, and I've got a lot of interesting questions. While we talk about the Nile crocodile, for example, I've always had one question that I would like to have answered by a professional such as yourself. Is it possible to crossbreed a Nile crocodile with a saltwater crocodile?
Yes, it is. I'm not actually sure if anyone has successfully hybridized those two species yet. They will certainly mate. There are a number of species where we know that they have produced fertile hybrids. So normally, if you hybridize two different species together, you made two different species, nothing happens, because the species concept that we are taught at school is that two separate species can't interbreed. Mm-hmm. Except that's not quite right, as we now know. Of course, you try and breed two fairly closely related species like lions and tigers, you end up with ligers or tigons. Yeah. But they're infertile. But with crocodiles, you can breed, say, a Siamese crocodile and a saltwater crocodile, which are different species but still relatively close. And not only do you get hybrids, but they're fertile. And you can actually then breed the hybrid's offspring and so on and so on. And you end up with these hideous-looking, weird, intermediate versions between the two species. You can't mate a saltwater crocodile with, say, an American alligator. They're too far apart taxonomically, or genetically, more to the point. And I'm not aware that anyone's done it with Nile crocs and saltwater crocs, or if they have, they haven't admitted to it. But hybridization is definitely a thing.
Is there a big difference in terms of the behavior between, let's say, a saltwater crocodile, a Nile crocodile, and an American crocodile that kind of you would find either in the Everglades or in the Taracoles River in Costa Rica? Are there fundamental behavioral differences between them?
Fundamentally, they act like crocodiles. The differences tend to come in things like social behavior. There are things like nesting behavior, for example, where Nile crocodiles and American crocodiles, they'll sort of build nests, sometimes out of sand, whereas saltwater crocodiles will build them out of vegetation, and American crocodiles sometimes will build them out of vegetation as well. So there's an overlap between the nesting strategies, but they're sufficiently different that they use different nesting strategies. But a lot of it comes down to social behavior. So Nile crocodiles tend to be more tolerant of each other. They tend to be more social. Whereas saltwater crocodiles traditionally are a lot more territorial. And you can see this, particularly the males. They're a lot less tolerant of other males and even females that come into their territory.
Because especially with saltwater crocodiles, I assume you're based on the Adelaide River in Darwin. That would be near you, would it?
It's about half an hour's drive down the road from me.
That's prime croc real estate.
Yeah, we're in prime croc. We all live in Darwin, slap bang in the middle of prime crocodile habitat.
Darwin is a place on my to-do list because you also have the cage of death in a large pool with a fully grown saltwater crocodile in a perspex cage, and you get lowered into the water with the croc. Have you seen that? Have you done it?
I haven't done it because we've got a better one in our backyard. So
It's not every man who can say that they own a 16-foot saltwater crocodile in their back garden, but you, fair play to you, are one of those men.
yes.
And tell us a little bit about your croc and the cage.
Okay, well, the crocodile, he's called Smorg or Smaug, depending on how much of a Tolkien geek you are. But, we called him Smorg. When I was a kid and I was reading Lord of the Rings, I thought it read Smorg. I didn't read the Silmarillion's appendices, which said, no, this is how you should pronounce it. So we call him Smorg. And we actually had a request from the BBC back in 2005, it was, and they said, look, we want to have a sequence for an upcoming documentary, David Attenborough documentary, which was Life in Cold Blood. We want to have a sequence of these two crocodiles underwater copulating. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And he said, and I quote, they say, we want to see pink bits. I'm like, okay.
Oh, blimey.
So I said, okay, interesting documentary you're making here. So I said, look, they said, look, can you film this in the wild? I think they were joking. But anyway, they said, can you film this in the wild? And I said, look, no, you can't, because most of the water quality is not very good. So I said, the only way to do it is to build a facility specifically designed for it. And they asked me how much it would be to build it and whether we could build it. And I said, yes. And we put this thing together, and we put these two crocodiles in there. And Smorg was one of them. And so, eventually, actually, it was National Geographic that got the shot the following year for various reasons. But so we ended up building this amazing facility that was designed for getting in the water behind a safety barrier with this big crocodile so that you could film natural behavior. And we set the whole thing up so it looked like a freshwater river. So you go in there, there's rainbow fish, and there's purple spotted gudgeon, and there's little shrimps swimming around, and looks like a natural pool. And then you've got this big crocodile in there too.
Is it oxygenated as well?
It's not. I mean, there's fish in there as well, and there's plants in there, and that sort of helps to oxygenate the water anyway.
Yeah.
We have a filtration system. So it's a natural filtration system. So we pump the water up through a biofilter, and then it flows over some rocks, and it flows through some vegetation. So it's like a natural decontamination process that we have.
Because I've seen you in the water, I was like, wow, it looks very clean.
Yeah, well, we can get it crystal clear, or we can get it quite murky. It depends on, a documentary say, look, we've got a shot of a crocodile swimming along and it goes underwater, and then we want to cut to a shot of a crocodile underwater. So they don't necessarily want it to look crystal clear. They want it to look slightly murky. So it looks like a natural place with a few fish swimming about. So it's, that's the balance that we have to get with it. But you can get in there behind this barrier. And I must admit, the first time I did it, it was an interesting experience, because even though I knew that this barrier was there, I was looking through the water, and suddenly this big nose started looming up towards me. And it sort of touched the barrier and stopped. And all the hairs on the back of my head just started prickling. And there's a part of your brain that says, get out. You should not be in this situation. This is a ridiculous situation to be in. But of course, you can override it. You say, no, hold on, there's a barrier there. We can't get through it. It's perfectly safe. And we've put people in there over the years. We've put presenters in there, and they all have the same experience. They all come out going, holy shit, because it's not something that they're used to experiencing, even though there's that barrier there. Because it's only a wire mesh. I mean, you can feel, when he moves, you can feel the water rushing over your body. Yeah. And that really helps to sell the whole thing.
You have a square, is that so you could have put the camera in?
Yeah, that's a camera port. He can actually put his nose through that slightly. So
yeah, because that's what I was thinking when there's a video on your YouTube channel, Adam Britton on YouTube, for anyone who wants to check him out. And I was looking at this going, what if his head comes through? That's a place you don't really want to be. And obviously, you've handled him. You've had him 10 years yourself. He was considered a nuisance croc. He'd be about 34 now, is he?
No, he's probably closer to 60 years old, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, when he came into captivity, he was maybe 4.5 meters, and he's been in captivity for 30 years, and he's now close to 5 meters.
Oh wow!
So crocs do most of their growing in the first 20 to 30 years. So he was probably about 20 to 30. I'd say probably close to 30 when he was caught, and then he's been in captivity for 30 years. So,
is it true they don't stop growing?
Not really. No, I mean they grow quickly when they're young, and then they slow down, and so you get this. It's like an S-shaped curve, and they slow down and slow down. So I mean, technically, yes, they keep growing, but it gets so slow. I mean, a crocodile that starts to slow down at 4.5 meters will never become a 6-meter crocodile. It just can't. Those big crocodiles like Lolong, the reason they get so big is because they grow fast when they're young. So they've already hit 80 to 90% of their maximum size by the time they're about 30 years old, and then the rest of it is just adding a few centimeters.
And would those factors be genetic like they would be in humans if they had their genes were predisposed to being larger than other crocodiles, or does it depend also on how much food they ate during their developing years?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a whole range of factors that can influence it. Genes, absolutely. Food intake, absolutely. Temperature, absolutely. And one of the theories that we proposed as to why you can get these really big crocodiles, that they often tend to come from these very isolated areas. One of the things that we know from animals in captivity is that if they get stressed, and by stressed I mean they're constantly hearing noises that they're not expecting, they're hearing voices, they're hearing traffic, things are constantly upsetting them. That actually affects their immune system, literally, and it can actually affect their growth rate. So crocodile farmers know that when they're raising their juvenile crocodiles, for example, they've got to keep them almost completely isolated from the sensitivity of the outside world. And so we can learn from that. And, we know that the same factors apply to wild crocodiles as well. So most of these rivers here now, and there's boats going up and down all the time, and, you get fishermen and you get people throwing beer bottles at them. And so all of this kind of stuff stresses crocodiles out. Whereas, Lolong, for example, he came from a swamp which was completely isolated and cut off from that contact with people. And it was only right towards the end of his life, or before he was captured, that he actually started coming into contact with people. So I think stress and contact with people, or the lack thereof, is a big factor in promoting growth rates in these crocodiles. And because now there's so many people around and there's so much contact between crocs and people, you're not seeing the same kind of animals that we were seeing 40, 50, 60 years ago.
Could you imagine the first pioneers who went to Darwin? Obviously, the Aboriginal tribes were well and truly accustomed to them, and that's, like you say, had that respect and fear for them. But could you imagine somebody who had just arrived in, and it had been unexplored by Western explorers, what they must have thought when they'd encountered these saltwater crocodiles? There must have been a load of fatalities.
Well, if you look at a lot of the early art that was produced by the first explorers that landed in Australia, they depict crocodiles as these gigantic monsters. They're all there with guns trying to shoot them, and these crocs, they've got massive jaws like this. And the art comes from the fact that that's how they saw them when they first saw them. They thought, "What on earth is this creature?"
And they must have been massive as well, because they had very little human interaction with industry.
Well, even if they don't, we're exposed to wildlife all the time through natural history documentaries and books and whatever. But if you'd never seen a crocodile in your life, and you suddenly saw a 4-meter crocodile sitting on the bank, that's a fairly average size for a saltwater crocodile. You're going to be blown away by that. You're just going to be like, what the hell is that? It's a gigantic gecko or something, and look at its teeth. It's just going to freak you out. And
imagine if you go to Lancashire or somewhere and you're just seeing a crocodile who's like 7 meters long, and you'd think it was a dragon or something,
Exactly. It's always amusing to look at some of the early art from descriptions that were obviously relayed to the artist. So the artist never seen whatever animal it is, like a wallaby, for example, and then they've tried to create this image And, it's got big canines, and it's just, look, you think, because their imagination has gone wild. And I think that plays a big part in it too.
Imagine the letters back home. I don't think I'll be visiting you for any time soon with some of those depictions that these artists have been floating around there.
Yeah, and of course, eventually they sent specimens over, and they're like, oh, okay, well, it's not quite as fearsome as we imagined. And then, of course, by the time they taxiderm it into some bizarre pose with its eyes sticking at odd angles, it looks a bit ridiculous. It's really, this is why you have to be in the presence of the animal before you really start to appreciate what it's capable of.
Well, you took it to another level. And when I seen this, I was just like, my God, this man has balls of steel. You were on an Anderson Cooper special, 60-minute special, where it was in Mombasa. There was a couple who you went actually scuba diving.
It was in Botswana, in the Okavango Delta. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that, because you can find that on YouTube. I can't remember the title of the video, but it's please tell us about that, because I remember seeing something about that before, and I started the reason how I came to discover you recently was there was so before we get on to the story about the 60 minutes, I discovered you because there was a very rare white-headed crocodile shot recently in Darwin. And you were saying that it was probably 1 in 10 million chance of finding a crocodile with that coloration. And apparently there is also an albino saltwater crocodile that's still alive in the area as well. So could you talk a little bit about them before we talk about the 60-minute special?
Okay, so albinism is incredibly rare. You've got albino animals, which are basically, they lack all pigment. Then you have leucistic animals, which lack basically most pigment, but there's a little bit of pigment left. And then you go step down from that, you've got something like hypomelanistic animals. So it's animals that have got less melanin in their skin. And so they can be quite light colored.
People like me with my freckles.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, my sister took all my melanin, for example. So,
she is for that.
Factor 50 sunblock on every time I go outside. And so you can see these crocs. They look like blonde crocodiles. Sometimes they're called golden crocodiles, but they're just the same. They're not albinos. They're not leucistic. They're just animals that have got a slight variation in their skin coloration. And a lot of this happens during development. So if the embryo, when it's developing, if the temperature gets too hot, you get errors in cell division. So if it's a little tiny embryo when it gets really hot, the errors in cell division can be very serious, and you end up with 2 heads or 2 tails, or the animal just doesn't survive. But if it's late in embryonic development, then by that stage the embryo is figuring out things like the patterns of scales on its skin and the colors, and so you get errors in cell division, and you get their variations in colors and variations in scales, and so it's not that uncommon to see animals that have got slightly lighter or slightly darker skin or unusual pigmentation.
That's fascinating in itself, how in comparison to mammalian gestation, it's the same doubling or exponential growth of cells, but it happens within the fertilized egg.
Yeah.
Is it true that temperature affects the gender of the animal?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So all embryos start off as female, and then once they get to about 20 days old, if the temperature is within a certain band, then it switches on a hormone, in effect, testosterone, and that produces a male. If it's outside of that temperature band, then it usually doesn't get switched on, and it continues to be a female. So so you get this. The crocs aren't the only ones. Sea turtles are the classic example that have temperature-dependent sex determination.
Poor old sea turtles. They have a hard time of it.
That too. So there's a whitish crocodile on the Adelaide River, which is just down the road. And I've seen it a couple of times, but it doesn't hang around too much. But it's not an albino. It's a hypomelanistic crocodile. So it does still have bits of black pigment on it, but its ground color is much lighter.
Because the Adelaide River, it leads into an estuary, doesn't it?
Yeah, the whole thing. There's about 120 kilometers worth of tidal river. It's a big river.
So you get points where where people have to cross the road during different tides.
No, you're thinking of the East Alligator River.
Oh, East Alligator.
So
Yeah,
that's in Kakadu National Park. That's a place called Cowles Crossing. And the
yes, that's
Cowles
the one.
Crossing, yeah, there's just a barrage across the river. So at a high tide, the water flows over the barrage, and all the fish come across. And the crocs come along, and they'll sit alongside the barrage, and they'll grab the fish as it comes over. And then as the tide goes back down again, they'll often go and sit on the road and just, bask. And of course, road traffic then wants to get back across the road, and they're hooting the horn to try and get the crocodiles out of the way.
And what kind of size crocs would you be dealing with there?
Oh, I mean, big adults. They're 4 or 5 meter long crocodiles. I mean, you get smaller ones too, 3 meters. But I mean, in a situation like that, if you want to compete, you can't be this big. You're not going to, you're just going to get eaten. So, I mean, you have to be a certain minimum size in order to really compete in that kind of a feeding situation.
So for juvenile crocodiles, they would primarily eat fish, amphibians, and then they would start working their way up to mammals then.
So they're mostly eating insects and small frogs. They'll eat lizards and snakes that come to the water's edge. They eat water rats. They'll grab birds. As they get bigger and bigger, they start grabbing birds. They'll start taking crabs, other crustaceans. But it's surprising, most of the things that even big saltwater crocodiles eat is actually relatively small. Most of their stomach contents is of fairly small things like rats and crabs. But they have the opportunity to take much larger prey. I mean, crocs are incredibly efficient in the way that they digest food. They can convert about 80% of the energy in their meal into body mass, which is just unprecedented.
Wow.
Which is, it's incredible. So they still eat quite small things. But yeah, they take wallabies, they'll take dingoes, they'll take cattle. They'll try, some of the big ones can try and take on buffalo, but sometimes it doesn't always work out as they have planned. I mean, buffalo are very big, powerful animals, and they have been known to kill big crocodiles trying to defend themselves. Yeah. But when you compare a saltwater crocodile to a Nile crocodile have got access in many countries within their range to much larger prey. And so Nile crocodiles are actually bigger animals. They're bulkier animals. They don't get to the same length as saltwater crocodiles. But for their size, they're actually heavier and they're actually stronger. So, I mean, for me, for example, when I went to Botswana, I would see a 4 meter Nile crocodile on the bank. And to me, instinctively, my brain said that looks like a 5 meter crocodile. It had that mass about it. And you were saying earlier about people, finding it difficult to estimate the size of crocodiles. I worked at a place many years ago where there were 2 crocodiles side by side in captivity. And we'd measured them both, so I knew that they were both about 4 meters long. But one of them was quite thin because it hadn't eaten very much. And the other one was fat. It was like, obesely fat. So I'd ask people, I'd say, which is the bigger crocodile, or what's the length of the crocs? And every single person without fail thought that the fat crocodile was at least a meter longer than the thin one. And that's purely because of its body mass. And so, you see a big 4 meter Nile crocodile, which is massive. I mean, it looks like it's been at the gym, it's had the steroids. And, your brain, you think it's bigger than it actually is. So, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up. Whenever I was a kid watching, wildebeest being attacked or zebras being taken in by Nile crocodiles or Thompson's gazelles, they looked massive, and then you'd look at saltwater crocodiles, and they didn't really seem to be as big, but they're supposed to be, they're known commonly as the bigger species. The sheer size and mass of the Nile crocodiles, you'd see like their heads are like a meter long and probably like half a meter wide.
Not quite that big. But
No.
But the heads are bulkier. I mean, they're not as long as saltwater crocodile heads, but they're massier, they're bulkier, they look bigger. They look just incredibly robust. And, I mean, the reason why is because they've got to clamp onto things. And the reason that crocodiles have got an incredibly strong bite force is not to crush things, it's to hold on to things. So you're grabbing onto the flank of an adult zebra, for example. You need to hold on pretty tight because you've got to apply your body force and all that energy into trying to drag it backwards. So you've got these massive skulls. you said, we're sitting on the alligator and its skull is just like solid. And it is. It's just solid bone, and it's incredibly strong to resist all of those forces that are being applied to it. When it's biting down on something like that.
And they're all muscle.
Oh yeah, they've got the massive amount of muscle, behind their necks, and muscle running through the actual jaw bones, and actually running through the sides of the skull. Just all of this space for muscle. So yeah, they have what's called super fast myosin as well, so they can shut it quickly and just clamp it shut and apply incredible force. I mean, this is an animal that has spent multiple millions of years perfecting, if you like, this predator design. So everything about it is just ideally suited to that kind of predation.
When you went scuba diving in the river, in Botswana, had you ever done that before, or was that the first time for you? And how did you feel about that?
Well, look, I'd sort of had done it before, but under very controlled conditions, and by that stage we had smog as well, and we had our facility. So I'd spent a bit of time underwater in controlled situations like that with crocodiles. And when I say a bit of time, as much time as I possibly could. And so you start to understand how they think, if you like, and how they sense and how they behave underwater. And, every so often this little thought goes through your brain, I wonder how would happen if this barrier wasn't there? Or, how much could I get away with knowing the more limited senses that the animal has underwater, and knowing what its boundaries are? What could I get away with? And then I heard this piece of news that these two filmmakers in Botswana had been diving with wild Nile crocodiles. And my immediate response was, it was like the two simultaneous responses in my head. The first was, that's nuts. And the second was, I want to do it. Because, I knew that they'd sort of done something that my brain said was possible. But the common sense part of my brain was saying, don't be stupid. You can't do that.
How did they arrive to that conclusion, Adam? Do you know? I mean, how did
they arrive to that?
Yeah, I mean, just one day they're going to go, you know what we're going to do? We're going to jump into a river with crocodiles and go scuba diving. It's like, what the hell drives someone to...
Well, the story goes, I was having this conversation with someone, and we were like, drinking some beer, going, these crazy people. And then the phone rang, and I kid you not, the phone rang about 2 minutes after we'd finished the conversation, and I picked it up, and it's like, this African accent was on the phone, and it turned out to be the guys we were talking about. I'm like, holy shit, you have no idea we were just talking about you. And they basically, they'd heard of me, and they'd been doing these things, and they had a film crew that wanted to come and film it, and they were looking for a scientist as well to come out and try and help them understand the whole phenomenon and see whether there's any research we could do. So anyway, I spent the next 40 minutes on the phone grilling this guy because I wanted to find out if they were totally nuts first. I'm like, well, okay, well, what's your safety protocol? I mean, how are you establishing it? How does the crocodile behave, and how do you understand the croc's behavior? And he told me afterwards, he said, it's just like the Spanish Inquisition for me. And I thought, look, if you're asking me to come over and do this, I need to make sure that, you're serious about it. Anyway, very quickly, it turned out, became very obvious that they were very serious about it. So yeah, like 2 months later, I was on a plane flying over there, and so they brought this film crew out from the UK. They wanted to make this documentary about it, and I'm sure the cameraman's going, "Oh God, we're going to have some great footage here." And I said, "Look, if we're going to do this, well, first of all, I said, look, let's try it. Let's see what happens." So
Anderson Cooper did it as well. I mean, hats off to him.
That comes a little bit later in the story.
Oh, right.
I mean, I can give you the shortened version of this.
No, work away.
Longer version if you want.
Yeah.
So, they told me that the reason that they had started doing this was because they were filming underwater anyway. They were doing it at a certain time of year in June and July when the water temperature was very cold. So it was like 14, 15, 16 degrees Celsius, which is pretty cold. Mm-hmm. And the reason that they did it at that time was because the water then goes crystal clear. It gets filtered through all of the pandanus, and it just becomes crystal. Whereas later on in the year when it warms up, you just get this algal bloom everywhere. You can't see a thing.
Right.
So they were just doing that out of necessity, if you like. And they never considered filming crocodiles. They stayed away from crocodiles and hippos. And so one day, this crocodile just came out of this hole in the bank and swam literally straight in front of their face. It was only small, but it swam right in front of their face and landed on the floor of the river and just sat there. So, they sort of looked at each other and said, well, let's go and film it. So they went over and they started filming it, and they realized that the croc just didn't care about them as long as they maintained a respectful distance from it.
And how is their vision under the water? Because they have a membrane that goes over their eyes when they're under the water, as you can see with your croc.
This is one of the things that they asked me to test, because I've always wanted to try and find this out. So we actually designed a series of little tests when I went over there. So one of them was a vision test. So I used a small high-density polystyrene. Well, it's not polystyrene. It's like a high-density foam ball. They use it on crab pots. And in fact, we use them on crab pots out here. Or we use them in lagoons here where we suspect that there's a crocodile. Because the crocs, they'll see these white, brown things and they just can't help themselves. They swim up to it and they go, and they bite it because they want to know what it is. And so, you come along and you see these big teeth marks in there and you think, okay, well, you can measure the distance between the teeth and you can estimate the size of the croc. Plus, now there's a crocodile in that particular billabong, so no swimming. So I used the same thing there and I attached it to the end of a pole. And so we went along until we found this crocodile. And I have to say I was a little bit apprehensive the first time we did this. In fact, the first time we did this, we had a mini incident, which I'll tell you in a sec. But, a couple of times later, this was about the third croc that we were on. So I had this long pole and I extended it out like a big long washing pole and put this thing on the end. And I moved it in front of the crocodile's face. And I was measuring the distance between the ball and the crocodile's eyes and also the angle going along that way. And it was very clear when the crocodile saw it, because it would be looking straight ahead and then suddenly this thing would come into its vision and it would look at it like that. And then, and the funniest thing happened, the croc then grabbed onto it like this. And I'd attached it to a piece of metal that was supposed to snap off. I was pulling this thing and I couldn't get the thing to snap. So this crocodile starts swimming off, towing me behind it.
Oh.
Meanwhile, the filmmakers behind can't stop themselves laughing. I mean, they said they couldn't film it because they were laughing so much because I'm being towed along by this crocodile. Anyway, eventually this crocodile went up to the surface and I was able to get a tape measure out and measure it from underwater. And of course, as soon as it realized that what it had was inedible, it just let it go.
Yeah.
We were able to then get the teeth mark measurements as well. That was just nuts. But the first time we did it, the production company was paranoid about safety, and so they put this scuba gear onto me, but they had like a pony bottle, a backup oxygen supply just in case. I had to wear a full face mask as well, which I hadn't worn before. And normally when you see a crocodile going along the river in the boat, you see a croc, goes in the water and it goes and sits on the bottom. And then usually it comes back up to the surface again after you've gone, and it will then go back up onto the bank and resume what it was doing. So you get in the water quickly. You want to get in the water quickly, you go upstream, and then you slowly drift back down towards it. But in this particular case, this production company, they were taking too long to get me suited up, so that by the time I got in the water, unbeknownst to me, the crocodile had moved behind us. And I was swimming along like this, looking forward to seeing this crocodile, and I felt this shove from the side of me. And I looked to the right of me, and I learned later it was my safety officer was, she was looking at me, and she saw the crocodile swim underneath me. And I hadn't seen this. Wow. So it came from behind me, basically, and swam underneath me. So she pushed me to the side like that. And I looked to the right, and I could see this crocodile's head just swimming past me like this.
What size croc was this?
Oh, it was close to 4 meters. So it was a 4 meter Nile crocodile. It was a big, bulky animal. So I saw this, and my instincts and training, whatever, kicked in, and I just held my breath and just waited and just watched it go past like this. And I was like, wow, that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
That's a perspective, Adam. I'm 6'1", and the rough calculation, 4 meters is basically 2 standard size doors, one on top of the other.
It's a big croc. Let's get this right. This is a big animal, and I'll tell you what, when you're underwater next to it, it looks even bigger as well.
God, actually, when you consider, like, your croc is, did you say he's 5 meters?
He's 5 meters, yeah. So he's even bigger.
So he'd be 2.5, like, say, living room doors in length. Yeah. That's insane.
No, it's a big crocodile. So anyway, when this croc swam past me, it then swam up to the cameraman. The cameraman didn't have much experience filming crocodiles, and he saw this crocodile and he freaked out, and he swung his camera around to try and block the crocodile from himself, which is probably what anyone would do under those situations. And the croc just sort of quickly bit his lens, like, get that thing out of my face, and then shot off into the distance. And I was actually reassured by that, because that showed me that this crocodile was not out there to get us. This crocodile was just, it's like, what the hell's going on here? It was, I think, a surprise to see us as we were to see it, and it just wanted to stay away from us. So we went back in the water and we did some more stuff. But we worked with the filmmakers, and I said, look, if we're going to do this, let's do something worthwhile out of it. So we started doing a genetic study to try and determine, because it was based on something that we've been looking at in Northern Australia, which was to use basically the genetics of a population to look at things like gene flow within that population, which could then tell us where the breeding areas were, where the migration was happening from one area to another, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the level of detail that you could get out of the analysis techniques that were being developed at the time was really quite exciting. So I said, look, let's do this with these Nile crocs as well. And so we actually did a transect across the whole of the Okavango all the way down to Mound. It took us, quite a few days to do that. And as we went, we dived with the crocodiles. And what we did was we took tissue samples from them, because one of the things that I did when I was down there with one of the crocs is I touched his tail. And they'd known anyway that you can get away with touching the tail, and the croc isn't bothered about this. So I said, okay, well, if you can touch its tail, then I can take a tissue sample from it. So that's why Anderson Cooper came out. These guys are like, okay, this guy's nuts. He's going to die. He's not only going to die with the crocodiles, but he's going to pick his tail up and he's going to cut a piece of skin off it. And this, and so, we did this. And, it was the first time anyone had attempted something like that. But the reason I did it was because I understood the animals. I thought, this animal is not going to respond to this. I'm going to take a little tiny sliver. It's going to like cutting a fingernail. When you cut a fingernail and you go just into the quick and it's a little bit painful, like, that's what it's going to feel like. So I picked up the tail of this crocodile and snipped off the thing. And
underwater,
you can see it underwater. And the biggest one I did it to was probably 4.5 meters. I mean, a massive, massive crocodile. And we were a little bit apprehensive about this to start with, but I said, yeah, no worries, I can do this. And the most reaction we ever got from a crocodile was, it moved its tail like that, as in, ooh, what was that? That was it.
Yeah.
And so, we got tissue samples from several dozen crocodiles that way. And that saved us having to try. I mean, normally if you want to do that, you've got to harpoon the crocodile and drag it into the boat and put it through this whole alien autopsy experience, and it stresses the heck out of it. So by doing this, we were able to do it a lot faster with a lot less stress to the animals. And we got all this amazing DNA.
What was Anderson Cooper like? Was he sound? Was he?
Anderson Cooper's crazy. I mean, in a good way. I mean, he's just got the most. He's got the most amazing anecdotes. When you get the guy with a beer or two, and he'll start relaying some of these amazing stories about people he's met over the years, and it's just he's hilarious. I mean, you don't get this when you see him on CNN. You've got no idea just how funny the guy is.
Tie and everything.
So no, Anderson was an absolute blast. I mean, he was just totally into it. He's like, I've worked with presenters who have been like, oh, I'm not sure about this. And every time the crocodile breathes in, they're, they're terrified. Anderson's
And
yeah, let's go, and he's straight in the water, and he was having a fantastic time.
it's the right attitude for a job like that. I was going to say I seen a documentary in 1999 on BBC, and I've never been able to find it since. But it was absolutely fascinating. They were looking at crocodiles to cure gangrene, and it started when a woman had fallen into, like, I think I don't know if it was in America or it was in Australia, but they had like it was in Australia. Do you remember it, dear? The documentary?
Oh, I remember the documentary because I was in it.
You were in it, yeah.
I was
that you?
I was the guy doing the research in the documentary.
Wow, because I've for 20 years I've because there's a scene where the camera crew is in the boat at night and a crocodile bites this metal boat and there's teeth marks, like actually holds it. That was you, because I was thinking.
That was me. Yeah.
Oh, what's the name of that documentary?
It's called The Secret Life of Crocodiles.
Secret Life of Crocodiles. Because 20 years I've been waiting to try and find that again. There's a scene where you catch a fully grown crocodile and you're walking on the cage and the thing is massive.
Yeah.
But the woman who got bitten, she got dragged into a pool during like a show.
Yeah, she was Rob Reddle's daughter. So there's Rob Reddle was he still is, like a Steve Irwin style, interacts with crocodiles kind of guy. And he's a real character. He's got a big bushy beard and he wears a hat and he sort of sits on the back of crocodiles and does all kinds of crazy stuff. But his daughter, she slipped into the water one day doing one of these shows and the crocodile bit her on the thigh and did a massive amount of damage. And she got this really nasty infection because there's a lot of really nasty bacteria that are on crocodile teeth because obviously, the croc's got bacteria, it's got food and all kinds of stuff on its teeth and it's picking up the bacteria that's in the water as well. And so what we wanted to do, the BBC came to me. This was shortly after I came to Australia. They came to me and said, look, we want to do a documentary about crocodiles. We want to do an interesting show. And so we fired off all kinds of ideas, and they weren't really happy with any of them. And I said to them one day, I said, well, look, one thing that has always fascinated me, and that is how do crocodiles manage to bite each other and inflict injuries on each other without suffering any serious infections or consequences? They seem to have an incredibly potent immune system. And the producer's like, oh, that's interesting. And she went home, apparently, back to the UK, and she sort of sat up in bed one night and went, holy mackerel, that's it. That's the thing in the show. So she rang me up and she said, do you think we could do this as a show, as a research project as well? So we actually set it up as a proper research project. We discovered this thing, this antimicrobial peptide. So it's like a protein that's present in crocodile blood. And this stuff basically, it pierces the cell walls of bacteriums and just destroys them, in effect. And so it's a very difficult thing to produce any kind of resistance to as a bacterium. And so we tested this, we extracted this, and we tested it against antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and it was successfully able to kill, I think it was Staph aureus at the time, golden staph, successfully able to kill that. So it was a massive revelation. But this thing hit the news, and I had all kinds of crazy people ringing me up after that, like angel investors offering me millions of dollars.
Wow! So for 20 years on, have they applied the what did you say it was antimicrobial peptide? Because I'm like, for 20 years until this moment right now, I've often wondered, did the scientists apply that and put it into production?
Okay, so up until that point, there'd already been some work done on antimicrobial peptides. They'd been discovered in frog skin and the trachea of cows, believe it or not, and a few other places. And so this was the first time we discovered it in an organism's blood, which was quite a thing. At that time, I was still working with the guy in the US who had developed this technique to fraction the blood into all these different components. But he lost the funding for what he was doing, and he went to another university, and so that whole project sort of ground to a halt. And we couldn't get any more funding to continue it, believe it or not, despite the fact that there was this massive amount of interest in it. And shortly afterwards, I mean, we did something else with him the following year. We retested it with freshwater crocodiles, and we found that freshies had got exactly the same thing in their blood as well. So we speculated that it was common to all crocodile species, although at the time we weren't able to test it. And simultaneously, there was a guy in the US who was working on alligator blood. And so he was aware of what we were doing. And he was looking at slightly different aspects of alligator blood. But eventually, to cut a long story short, we ended up working together. And so he came over to Australia, and we did some more work on the saltwater crocodile blood, and we published another couple of papers out of that. But I mean, really, I'm not a biochemist. So, my interest was in the application to it, and I was interested in it from a biological point of view and what benefits it had for the croc's physiology. But I wasn't really qualified to actually continue to do that work myself. And so this guy who's based in Louisiana, Mike Merchant, his name is, he's basically continued that research now, and he's done a heck of a lot more stuff looking at different species and various things. And independently, there was another group based in Singapore as well that was doing some research on it too, and they made some progress as well. But we haven't got to the stage where you can, take a little tablet, crocodile, and you can pop that, and suddenly all your ills are cured. Because I've had people ringing me up for years. Literally years and years and years. I even had one this year. Someone sent me an email about that show and said, "Did you ever manage to develop this? Because my father or uncle or brother or whatever, and it's always some member of the family, has got this horrible debilitating disease, and we'd like to be able to cure it." And you feel terrible because you think you want to say, "Oh, look, I can't help you." This has got a lot of potential, but like any research, any kind of potential medical application that you find that's originated in animals, it needs to go through a huge amount of research before you can get to the stage where it's actually a drug that you can buy over the counter, and it's just not there yet.
That's a real shame, because when I was 16 when that came out, and I remember watching that going, wow, because my uncle had he crashed a bike back in the 60s, and he lost his leg, and he got gangrene in his leg, and they eventually had to amputate it all the way up to his thigh. But you think, like, for people who have those kind of ailments, if applied on time, you could really burst someone their quality of life.
Yeah, no. My grandfather died of a antimicrobial resistant bacteria in hospital. My father had gangrene in his leg. He had a similar thing happen to him as well. So, for me, it was personal as well. I wanted to be able to see this through, but I just knew there was no way that it could ever be done in time. Maybe if I'd been a biochemist, then I would have just focused entirely on that. And sometimes when you look back on your life and you think maybe I should have done that, then that was certainly an option. But I decided to go in a different direction.
Well, there's always time, I suppose. You obviously have data you've compiled yourself, and if you were to find a biochemist, that could really revolutionize. If you look at how with how the antibiotics that are being used and penicillin, how there's a lot of bacteria out there now that is resistant to antibiotics because of its presence in food and how over-prescribed it is in medicine these days.
I think, Mark's running with this. I'm pretty... It's in good hands with him, but it does take a long time to do. And, even though... because you get a lot of baseline stuff before you can even get to the point of saying, okay, how do you turn this into something that's going to work with humans as well?
It's clinical trials as well.
Oh, don't even start. Yeah, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff. And there was even someone selling crocodile blood powder on the internet back in 2001. And
China, was it?
They were trying to use my name to endorse it as something which worked. God,
yeah.
It's just...
I tell you one thing though, Adam, that was probably one of the best documentaries I'd ever watched in my life. And The Secret Life of Crocodiles. It's something that now I know. Is it on YouTube? Is it?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I've got a copy of it somewhere, hidden away somewhere.
I'd love to see it again.
Yeah, I think the last time I tried to look for it, the last time I saw it was several years ago, and it was like some super low resolution copy.
How did it feel when, I can't remember what size the croc was that bit the boat, but to see a metal boat with it had just been striped.
Well, I was standing that far away from the hull when I saw the tooth go through the hull, and I described it like those sardine cans where you do that. That's what it looked like. It was like, except it pretty fast. And so it tore this strip. It was probably about that long in the side of the boat, starting above the water level and disappearing under the water level. And all this water started gushing in. And at the time, we had the crocodile on the end of a harpoon line. The harpoon is like this little hook that goes in the skin. So,
yeah.
And we're thinking, we're going to have to cut the line and let the crocodile go. And we all sat on the other side of the boat, so we tilted it out of the water like that. So there wasn't much water rushing in, and we managed to make it back to the boat ramp, which was only a couple of k's away. So
a couple of k's. Oh man, I thought you were going to say it was maybe like 30 feet away.
No. It was.
What are your chances if you were to fall into? I mean, obviously it's dangerous enough to fall into any body of water, but what are your chances of survival if you do fall into like something like the Adelaide River or the Nile and it's crocodile infested? What are your chances of survival, and what is your best strategy to get out of there unscathed?
Well, as soon as you say that, these things far from it. First of all, there's hardly any crocs left in the Nile anyway.
Really?
No, unfortunately there's not many left. There's your chances in a crocodile inhabited river. We don't say crocodile infested. That's like
inhabited.
Inhabited. Yeah, we have to be respectful of the end. Anyway, so yeah, if you fall into the Adelaide River, I mean, it just depends. I mean, you're probably going to be okay. Probably. I mean, I reckon I could probably swim across the Adelaide River from one side to another, and make it probably. But the fact is, I couldn't guarantee it, and that's the thing. I'm not going to take that level of risk.
No, it would be terrifying.
And if you fall in the water anywhere near a crocodile, it's going to come over and investigate. So you've got a pretty good chance. I mean, I know someone who's fallen in the Adelaide River. They were on the front of a boat that I was driving, and we hit a log fast, and they went straight over the front.
Oh man!
I've never seen someone get back in the boat so fast in my entire life. They were straight back in there. It's not an instant death sentence, but the fact is that if you do that, especially if you splash around and you're making noise, you're going to attract the attention of crocs. And crocs they're just curious animals. They're like, what the hell's that? And they're going over and have a look.
Yeah, so, they're not mindless like killing machines.
Oh God, no! They're completely. They're very smart animals. They're very I mean, when I say intellectually curious, I mean from the perspective of a reptile, it's a curious creature. It wants to check things out. That's why you can put a white foam polystyrene ball in the water and come back a week later and there's croc bite marks on it because, I mean, they don't have hands to investigate things like we do. All the sensitivity is on their mouth and on their tongue and on their jaw. So if they want to check something out, they mouth it. They bite it. They want to find out what it actually is. And if that happens to be you, then it can be quite painful. But yeah, I mean, they're also opportunistic. And if something goes splash in the water next to them, they're not going to think about whether they should do it. They'll just do it.
Yeah, instinctively. Which reminds me, because their skin, each one of those little circles on the skin has a dot, which is a pressure point on their skin. When I was probably about 13, Terry Nutkins was doing something for the Really Wild show.
Terry Nutkins, I remember that. Yeah.
Terence of Nutkinshire. I think it was a crocodile, but he was demonstrating how those cells worked. So he simulated an animal lapping at the water, and he had this. It was like a kidney-shaped pool, and this huge crocodile. You could just see it gliding up, and I gotta say, Terry had some balls because he was sat there slapping the water, and he got out at the right time. But this crocodile just lunges out of the water with its jaws open. And so I had to give mad props to Terry for that.
Yeah.
But did you hear about this guy in Stockholm, in Skansen here in Stockholm? We have the aquarium. And the owner of Skansen was having a party recently. And they have, I think, an alligator in there and a Cuban crocodile. And the Cuban crocodile that lives in the enclosure actually belonged to Fidel Castro. And when you talk about how inquisitive crocodiles are, when I was down in Wootton's in the Everglades, Gator John, he told me that Cuban crocodiles, they hunt as pack animals and they would be the most intelligent. They would be more like the velociraptor. Is this true?
Well, I think there's a little bit of exaggeration there, but there is actually genuinely There are some valid observations of Cuban crocodiles hunting in those manners. And I mean, they are incredibly dangerous animals. I mean, they very
to humans as well.
Curious. Yeah. I mean, if you're ever out there camping doing crocodile work, for example, you put a fence around your camp to try and keep the Cuban crocodiles out. No, they're very smart almost terrestrial hunters as well, because and it's thought that because there's nothing in Cuba at the moment that requires an animal like a Cuban crocodile in order to take it down. They're massively over-designed. It's a bit like having a Ferrari, driving down the high street. It's like, why would you have it? But in recent history, of course, Cuba had these giant ground sloths. Of course, we know from fossil evidence, and so these animals, the Cuban crocodiles, are just perfect for taking down, or the ancestors of them were perfect for taking down giant ground sloths.
How long would these sloths be?
Oh, big! These massive. These things. Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you exactly how big they were, but they're big things. And I mean, so these are what these animals are basically what they had evolved, if you like, to be able to tackle, to be able to take these things down. It's a little bit like Nile crocodiles. They've got this incredible mass because they have large, powerful prey that is available that they can take down. Whereas saltwater crocodiles, even though they're longer, potentially, they don't have the same mass to them. The same strength to them by comparison, because most of the prey they have available is a lot smaller. So, it's prey availability is driving their evolution, if you like.
Yeah.
But Cuban crocs they've sort of, overshot, if you like, and haven't quite come back to reality yet.
I've a couple of for the listeners now. I wanted to talk about the different breeds. So you have the mugger, which would be native to Pakistan, Iran, and I suppose the Arabic world. And I think there is some sort of like a palace dedicated to the mugger crocodile. Is it in Pakistan where there's a kind of a palace that just has a whole lake full of them?
Yeah, there's a few interesting places like that around the world with different crocodile species where, almost like the ancient Egyptians, they have animals which are essentially sacred animals. And they interact with them on a regular basis, so much so that they've essentially become totally tame. They've become so habituated to having people around that they just sit around like dogs. Well, not even like dogs, like sleepy dogs. They just lie there.
How are the mugger in terms of let's say in terms of aggressive? We'll keep it spicy. Would the mugger crocodile be dangerous?
Well, I mean, all crocodiles are dangerous because they have teeth and jaws and they know how to use them. But I mean, like any animal's going to bite you if you piss it off, basically.
Fair enough.
With crocodiles, 18 of the species have been responsible for they've been responsible for attacks over the years. And there's about 6 of them that are sort of slightly higher ranked. And the muggers are in there. They have killed some people. But, I mean, they only get to be, 12, 13 feet long. So they don't have the same potential as something like a Nile crocodile, which gets to be much, much larger and is much stronger, obviously. But, yeah, they have killed people. And they've certainly bitten people, non-fatal attacks. There's quite a few incidents of that happening. They're not to be trifled with, muggers. But like a lot of animals, you can... I don't know, whether it's certain individuals or the amount of exposure that they've had, but you will always find some animals that you can habituate and they become essentially relatively tame.
Like
the only trouble with a croc is if you get it wrong, then the consequences are fairly serious.
You don't get the second chance.
No. Well,
as dangerous as the Nile crocodile is, they're not a patch on hippos. I mean, hippos are. Have you dealt with hippos in the wild?
They actually, we estimate that they actually kill more people than hippos at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a bit of a bone of contention, if you like. Now, traditionally, the myth has been that Nile crocodiles are incredibly dangerous. But then people pointed out, well, actually, hippos are incredibly dangerous as well, probably more dangerous. And in fact, when we were diving with the Nile crocodiles, I mean, whenever we saw any hint that there was a hippo around, we would not even go anywhere near the water. We were actually in the water once when we came across a hippo, and I saw its butt. It was like that far away from me. This grey thing coming up, and I was, through my mind, I thought, oh, that's a rock. I can put my hand on that. I didn't actually do that because the guy in front of me turned around and went like this and get the hell out of here. Because he realized what it was. And as we were swimming away, I realized what it was. They're very, very dangerous animals. But what they tend to do is they tend to knock people out of these macquaras, which are like these really shallow, carved wooden boats. And they've got a freeboard like that. So, you've got the top of the boat there and you've got the water there. So it doesn't take much to capsize these things. And so the hippos, they get really annoyed. They'll see you coming and they get pissed off and they'll come out and making a big noise. And they'll often rush you. And so these macquaras get capsized quite a lot. And quite often there are crocodiles there as well, and they take advantage of situations like that. But there's also, there's many examples from different countries where we're just seeing really high attack rates from crocodiles, including fatality rates from Nile crocodiles. But there are some countries where we just can't get information from it. So one of the projects that we run is this thing called CrocBite. So CrocBite is a database of every crocodile attack that we can find that's ever been recorded, and we're constantly updating it. So we've got close to 5,000 records on there now.
Wow!
But there are some countries where we just can't get the data from it, and I think it's because those countries are just, it's not a priority for them. They haven't realized the benefits of collecting those data. And in some cases, they're embarrassed by it. They don't want people to know that if you come here, there's there are 500 people killed a year by crocodiles, for example. You don't want to stick that on your tourism brochure.
No, you don't.
But the thing is, this information is incredibly useful because it tells us where the patterns are. And then once you know where the patterns are, you can actually start addressing them and try and save people's lives.
There's a good friend of mine called Mark Leonard who's he's big in the kayaking world, and years ago he was telling me that he had a friend from South Africa who was kayaking down a stretch of river that had been unexplored in the Congo, and apparently he was killed, and it was caught on the GoPro as well.
Yeah, I've seen that footage. Yeah.
Oh, you did? You seen it?
I've seen the footage. Yeah.
Is it graphic or is it just kind of?
Well, it turns around, and I think you can see him there, and it starts looking forward. Then he turns around, and you just see this swirl, and what possibly looks like a crocodile tail, and that's it. So it's not graphic at all. You can't really see very much, but it's obvious that he was taken by a crocodile.
Yeah, because I asked Mark about it. I said, God, that's probably one of the worst ways you could ever go. And Mark goes, here, to be honest with you, he probably would have been made up to go that way. That was the kind of guy he was.
Yeah.
So, that was an unfortunate thing to happen. But, I think from what I gather, they had been warned about the presence of crocs on that stretch of the river as well. But what was the story with the saga of Sweetheart as well? Wasn't there like a hyperbolic story about a large crocodile in Australia, and they based Blackwater, that film that was out about 10 years ago? I remember watching that, and it was about like a saltwater crocodile had stalked these people. Was that based in any kind of reality, or was that just pure?
Well, Blackwater or Sweetheart?
Well, both.
Okay, well, Sweetheart was a real incident. It was a real crocodile, and Sweetheart never killed anyone. He wasn't that big. He was only about 4.2 meters. He's not that big. He wasn't. People think he was like the record-breaking crocodile, but it was just an average-sized crocodile. But yeah, he was just he just got really pissed off by boat engines, and he would constantly go and attack them. It's possible that he was fed as well, because there are examples of crocodiles today that will come up and hang behind your boat, and they'll often bite at the cowling of the engine. And the reason they do that is because people throw them fish. They'll catch some fish, or they'll chop it up, take the fillets off, and throw them the fish frame, which is incredibly dangerous behavior. And we try and tell people not to do that.
Do you associate people with food then? Well,
exactly, and so Sweetheart definitely existed, and Sweetheart was caught by a real character here, Dave Lindner, but unfortunately, because of the way it's just unavoidable, he died during capture. So his body is mounted, but Sweetheart's body, that is mounted in the museum here in the Northern Territory. And Blackwater was partially based on that, and partially based on 2 or 3 different stories. Actually, there was an incident where some kids were down quad biking just after a cyclone, and one of them, we think he got swept away in the currents.
Yeah,
but he was also grabbed by a crocodile. And these guys were waiting in this tree, and they claimed the crocodile brought the body back to them and displayed it to them, which doesn't really make much sense to me because crocs don't do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's sort of they were stuck up a tree, with crocodiles around. And then there was another famous incident, a lady called Val Plumwood, and she was knocked out of a kayak, and she was attacked 2 or 3 times by a crocodile, but she was able to escape up a bank. But she kept falling back into the water, and the crocodile kept going for her. So we worked on that Blackwater film. We did all the crocodile.
Oh, you did?
We did all the crocodile special effects for it.
Wow.
So all the crocs in there are real crocodiles. So we used a variety of crocodiles, and we trained them to do certain things. This was about the time that Rogue, that movie by Greg McLean, was also being made.
Rogue.
And he originally wanted to use a real crocodile, but when we read the script, we're like, I'm sorry, but you can't get a real crocodile to do this because this is not a crocodile. You created a monster here, but it's not actually a crocodile. Whereas with Blackwater, the producers wanted it to feel real. So I went through the script and said, okay, well, a croc wouldn't do this, but if you did this instead, that would be realistic. So they ended up with something, I think, a very effective movie at the end of the day. Because the crocs, it's the hungriest crocodile you've ever seen, but it's a bit more believable than usual.
Yeah, because there was one terrifying scene in that I'll never forget is when they're stuck up in the tree for about 4 days, and I think that the guy who had the boat, he died, and he had a flare gun or something. The boyfriend had been killed as well, but then the croc had taken the body and was just chewing on the body during a lightning storm, and they're like, "Oh no, they're eating him! It's eating him!" And I was like, "Oh god!" But that was
the thing that was based on those
lads.
Kids stuck up the trees. Yeah, that was based on that.
Yeah,
there's a sequel to that movie coming out soon.
Really?
Yeah, I know that because Smorg is the star. He's the movie star.
He's the crocodilian version of Bart the bear.
He's a crocodile version of I don't know, what do you call him? Is it Chris Hemsworth or something? He's a handsome croc. That's the star of the show.
He stole the show with his pearly whites. So you must have known Steve Irwin pretty well.
I didn't know him very well. I met him once. I mean, I knew of him, obviously. I mean, his reputation was kind of hard to avoid. And in fact, I actually worked on the very first episode of The Crocodile Hunter as a croc expert. This was when I was back in the UK before I came here. The production company sent me this documentary that he'd done called 10 Deadliest. It was about the 10 deadliest snakes in Australia. And so they said, "Oh, watch this. This guy's a star, and he's going to make this. We're making this thing called The Crocodile Hunter with him, episode 1." So I watched this, and I'm watching this thinking, this guy's nuts. So anyway, they sent me the script for this thing, and I'm going through this thing, and I've got the red pen out with all this stuff. And I don't know what they did. That was my only contribution to it. And then he sort of became this phenomenon. And I mean, here in Australia, everyone's just taking the piss out of him all the time. It's like, this guy. They thought it was just a little bit over the top what he was doing. I mean, it's really, everyone in the US adored him.
Yeah.
Everyone in Australia is like, oh yeah.
They thought he had notions, as they'd say in Ireland.
Exactly. And anyway, at one point, I happened to be in Brisbane for about 6 or 7 hours transiting through the airport. And I sent them an email a few days before and said, look, I'm going to be there. I want to go out to the Australia Zoo. And if Steve's around, it'd be good to catch up and have a chat. So anyway, I went there. And you've got to remember, at this time, I was working for a guy called Graham Webb, who he was the person that I came to work with when I came to Australia. And he's sort of a long-established crocodile researcher. He's also a very polarizing person, and he's got very outspoken views. And Steve Irwin hated him. It's like, because, Graham was a big proponent of harvesting wild crocodile eggs, for example, and Steve was like, we've got to save all the crocodiles. So anyway, I think Steve must have known that I worked for him. So anyway, I went across those completely, cards on the table, no pretensions. I just want to catch up and talk crocs.
Yeah.
So I went there, and they said, "Oh no, sorry, Steve's not here. He's off filming somewhere in another country." So okay, no worries. Well, they said, "Oh, but here's so and so, and he'll show you around the crocs." So he went to show me around the crocs. And at one point, suddenly the radio rings, and they're talking on the radio, and someone comes up to me and said, "Oh, Steve would like to see you now." I said, "Well, I thought he was in, Vietnam filming crocodile." "Oh no, he's here." "Really? Okay, sure. Let's go and see him."
You've passed the test.
So I went in there. There's Steve and Wes Mannion, who's his offsider, and the entire staff of the reptile section. I'm sitting around this table, and I'm like, "Okay, this is interesting." And I sit down, and Steve's all very jolly, and, "Hey, how are you doing?" and all the rest of it. And he's completely the same personality in, when you talk to him, as he's on the TV screen. He doesn't have an off switch.
Yeah.
And so I sat down with this thing, and the very first thing he did was he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Why does Graham Webb hate me?" And I'm sitting back, and I said, "I don't know, Steve." I said, "I'm Adam. This Graham is, I work for the guy, but I don't share his views necessarily." And he went on. He started going off about this, about Graham's views about this and Graham's views about that. And so I had to sort of talk to him about this stuff. I said, "Look, Steve, you've got to understand X, Y, and Z." And we were talking about sustainable use, which he always hated. And I said to him, "Look, you're doing sustainable use here." And he just about fell off his chair. And I said, "Look, you're using crocs. It's just a term. It's just a word. It's a buzzword. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, it means something, but, don't get hung up on it. At the end of the day, it's just a conservation mechanism that he's promoting. You don't like it because it involves harvesting baby crocodiles. Animals that are going to die anyway. That's a whole other can of worms. Anyway, but you sort of hit it off pretty well, actually. And I think we're talking there for about 2 hours. And we got on pretty well at the end of the day. And I left, and he said, "Oh, we'll take you back to the airport. We'll get a car for you." And they're running me back to the airport, and the person next to me, their phone rang, and they said, "Oh, Steve's on the phone. He just wanted to talk to you again." So, "Hey, how's it going?" And I said, "Oh, I was really, really impressed. Really good to meet you and all the rest. And we're looking for a researcher. If you're interested in a job, we can offer you a job here." So I got offered a job as Steve Irwin's crocodile research scientist.
Wow.
At the time, but I turned him down because I was involved in a whole bunch of other stuff. Anyway, and it would have been an interesting. Sometimes you get to forks in your life, and you think, "Can I go that way or that way?" So that would have been an interesting fork in my life if it had gone in that direction.
Well, I suppose you carved out your own niche as well. But he was. I mean, it's nice to hear he was because he seemed like a real legend, and it shined through with his personality. And I suppose it was good. It's good for the awareness of the animals. Have you ever done anything with Komodo dragons?
I haven't really done any research. We were going to do something with them at one point. We were going to apply the antibiotic blood test to Komodo dragons. In fact, the person I was working with, that's what they started working on. They started looking at because at the time, this was when it was thought that Komodo dragons had these mouths that were full of bacteria, and so that when they bit their prey, they died of bacterial infection. Now we know that they're actually venomous. And
it is venom.
Yeah, the evidence for that's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah,
that they're actually doing that. And so, but at the time, there was this guy in the US was saying, "Well, how can these Komodo dragons fight each other as they do? They have these big sparring contests." and they bite each other. I mean, how can they bite each other and survive? How do they deal with the bacteria? They must have some interesting antibiotic mechanism in their bodies. So, sounds familiar. That's how I came to contact him originally, because I thought, well, we can apply this to crocodiles as well. But we never sort of ended up doing it. And there was a couple of times later on where I nearly got to do crocodile stuff. I mean, Komodo dragon stuff. I've been there a few times. I've seen the dragons. In fact, I'm going there at the end of the month again.
Indonesia?
Yes, I'm going back to Komodo for just a few days. So,
that'd be awesome.
And we're looking forward to that. Yeah,
I'll tell you what. You'll have to send me some pictures of the experience, or get me on FaceTime so I can see it firsthand.
Well, yeah, this time I'll have my decent camera and lens with me, so I'll be able to take some decent photographs of it this time.
I was going to ask you about invasive species, because I know that in the Everglades right now, they have a massive problem with, is it Burmese or Indian pythons that have Burmese pythons,
yeah.
And they're destroying everything. And apparently, the Environmental Protection Agency are actually giving people money to capture these pythons, but they're very, very elusive and very difficult to find. Even alligators are being eaten by these things. Is there any a realistic solution to deal with them?
Well, you're possibly asking the wrong person, to be honest. I mean, I don't think they're going to have a major impact on alligators. I mean, we're talking, there are probably over 1 million alligators in Florida. So, I mean, there's a lot of alligators there. There's a lot of really good habitat. But I mean, the only way to tackle an invasive species is to get onto it once it gets established, forget it.
It's like the snakehead fish in America as well. That's another.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you've got this small window of opportunity where you can actually eliminate it, and you just have to throw everything at it in order to get rid of it. Because if you don't, then you just have to basically. I mean, if an invasive species moves into an area, I mean, it changes the whole ecosystem and the whole food web and all the interrelationships. But, I mean, it doesn't end the world. I mean, it creates a new normal, in effect. That's not necessarily one that we want.
Yeah.
We don't want that invasive species there. And if it gets rid of species that we value, which is hopefully all of them, then that's a really negative thing. I mean, with cane toads in Australia, for example, they're classic invasive species that we have to deal with. I mean,
were they American from the beginning?
Say again?
Were they from America from the beginning?
They were from Central or South America. But they were brought across to Queensland, and there was actually a lot of opposition at the time to releasing them. I think everyone thinks that all these people are like, let's put cane toads out there, but there was a huge amount of opposition from scientists. This is going to sound familiar. And he said, actually, no, this is a really dumb idea. Don't do it. But the industry put a lot of pressure onto the government, and they released them, and then that was the end of that. And so now the scientists have been trying to pick up the pieces of that for quite some time. But I mean, nothing has really gone extinct as a result of cane toads, and this is one of the things that's always been pointed out. I mean, they are an invasive species, and they have had an impact on the ecosystem, but nothing's actually disappeared. The only thing that's probably happened, well, it's certainly happened, is it's changed the densities and distributions of existing species. So, I mean, freshwater crocodiles, for example, I mean, we don't know how many freshwater crocodiles there used to be in parts of Queensland because no one ever recorded it. All we know now is how many there are at present. But, I mean, now that they've gotten across into the Northern Territory and are moving into Western Australia, there are some places where freshies have been seriously impacted by them, and some places where it just hasn't had any effect at all. And it's something to do with resource use.
Well, what's the story with the freshwater crocodiles in Australia? In terms of species, are they their own unique species?
Yeah, they're a separate species, yeah.
What size do they grow to?
They're a lot smaller. They're fish, they're aquatic specialists, much more so than saltwater crocodiles are. One of the prevailing theories was that they essentially evolved from a saltwater crocodile ancestor and got pushed further upstream and became more specialized to these more freshwater environments. They're quite saltwater tolerant, actually. If you back in the early 70s, when all the saltwater crocodiles had been shot by the hunters, they were finding freshies in river mouths where it's 32 parts per million.
Right.
And they're quite happy there. The thing that was pushing them out of these areas was saltwater crocodile. So as the saltwater crocodile populations started to recover again, it pushed these freshies back into these freshwater areas. And then so you've got this pressure from saltwater crocodiles pushing them up. And then you've got cane toads coming in as well from another direction, in effect also putting pressure on their populations. And so it's actually raised their conservation status to near threatened from these concerns. So, it has had an impact on quite a few populations. But I mean, no, they only get to be half the size of a saltwater crocodile. I mean, the biggest freshie I've ever seen was 3.3 meters. And that was like super rare. Most of them get to maybe 3 meters, 2.5 meters. But again, I mean, if you see it, the 2.5 meter freshie, it looks massive because it's got these incredibly robust heads. And you look at it, wow, that's big, but it's only 2.5 meters. Whereas a 2.5 meter salt is like this really thin, skinny thing.
Yeah. I was going to say, is there anything that actually eats the cane toad? Or are they kind of poisonous?
Yeah, there's a few things. There's a few things that eat cane toads. There's a few birds that have figured it out. There's some snakes that will eat the juveniles. There's even some fish that will eat the tadpoles quite happily and eat the eggs as well.
Oh.
But there was we actually found a few years ago when we were working on freshwater crocodiles. We were working on these pygmy crocodiles. They only get like this big. We found cane toads in this area which had their back legs twisted off, and some of them partially eaten and some of them completely removed. And we'd also seen saltwater crocodiles in Queensland with cane toads in their mouth, and they were holding them by the back legs and they were flicking them like that. They're trying to flick the back legs off. So we put two and two together and we thought, well, these freshies must be adapting and taking the back, because you could see what looked like bite marks on these back legs. But we went back a few years later to the same area, and we found again the same thing, but we also found them in these little piles sitting on rocks. And I thought, well, that's odd. Crocodiles don't do that. And we saw some water rats as well. And so my wife, Erin, who's also a crocodile specialist, she sort of said, oh, hold on a second. This is typical water rat behavior. They create these feeding platforms. So it's probably the water rats that are doing it. But it was just a single observation and a thought. But then there was a paper published just last week on that exact subject that found water rats were eating the cane toads, and they'd flipped them over. Wow. And they were eating out some of the internal organs that didn't have any toxins in them, and also eating the flesh on the back legs. And they were leaving them in these piles on rocks. So it's like, so in one respect, it's really cool to see that. In another respect, you think, oh, we should have published that years ago. But no, so there's definitely quite a few animals that have learned to take them on. And there's a few birds as well. They've figured out to flip them over and do the same thing to eviscerate them.
Yeah, there's always a chink in the armor somewhere. It's funny we talk about toads, because I only found out recently that a toad can live to 50 years in captivity. I never knew that. I saved 4 toads from my friend's place. He was doing up the garden, and we were driving a machine, and I found these little toads, and I tried to save as many of them as I could. My daughter had asked, someone had accidentally stood on a small toad, and I felt bad having to do it, but its guts were hanging out, so I just had to go, sorry, mate, and just, as much as it pained me to do it, just slapped it off the road, and it was like this. And I felt, even though it was the toad, I felt bad. I felt like, and I told my daughter, and she was like, how could you? And so I decided, I said, look, I could probably find a few more, and we can take some home and keep them safe while the garden is being done up. So I had these toads, and we researched the toads that they can live up to 34 years in captivity. So I had a lot more respect for them. So we have these 4 toads now, and we give them dried bloodworms. They didn't touch that. And then we had frozen mosquito larvae that had been enriched with salmon oil. Didn't have that. I was like, God, these things are going to starve if I don't give them something. So I made a little enclosure for them, and it's nice and cozy in there for them. They got like a little jacuzzi and a pool, and a couple of some vegetation. So the last ditch effort was mealworms, and I was amazed at how these guys they went from being very relaxed to just predator, and the speed in which they managed to eat these mealworms was amazing.
Yeah.
And it's also funny how I wanted to mention something earlier on. You say your wife's name is Erin.
Erin, yes.
That's my sister's name.
All right. She's her main name is O'Brien. She's Irish.
Good Irish. Good stuff. Well, my sister Erin, she was in Darwin about 12 years ago. She was telling me about an Irish girl she met who went out into the mangroves swimming in the evening. She was an amazing swimmer, but my sister was like, geez, you want to be careful there going out. But she'd be swimming in the mangroves, and there was box jellyfish and there was crocodiles. But this girl didn't care. She just went out and swam. And when I think about that girl, I'm like, Jesus, it's either brave or stupid, But it must be a total nightmare sometimes living in Darwin. You've got snakes, spiders, cone shells, box jellyfish, sharks, and mosquitoes, and God knows what else.
Yeah, I think there's this thing about Australia is that everything's trying to kill you, and I think some people get the impression that you can't do anything without something leaping at your face and trying to kill you. But I mean, it's not the way it really is out here, really.
Well, that's a relief.
There's wildlife out there, but most of it keeps to itself and does its own thing. And in places where you're going to encounter them, as long as you're sensible and as long as you look after and respect the animal, you're going to be fine. There's places where, you can potentially put yourself at danger. And sometimes people think, well, why can't I go swimming in the Adelaide River? So I'll show them the Adelaide River. I'll say, you see that muddy water there with all that mud? You really want to swim in there? There's a swimming pool just there. It's got beautiful, crystal clear water. So, there's alternatives to do all of these things. And it's just an adaptation. I can't deal with the traffic in the UK anymore, for example. It's just total chaos.
Do you miss the UK? Is there anything from home you miss?
No. Jaffa Cakes.
And Monster Munch.
There's a few little things like that from my childhood that I miss. But no, really, I don't miss it at all. So.
And do you get back much?
No, my like I said, I lived in Hong Kong briefly because my mum and dad lived there. Anyway, they sort of ended up moving to Europe, and now my dad's passed away. My mum's moved back to the UK. So now that she's back in the UK, I'm sure I'll come back and see her a little bit more often. Yeah, but maybe once a year. And
then you can drop into Crocodiles of the World in Whitney.
That's
Ben was the guy I was chatting to, and my oldest sister Patricia lives down there, and she found it funny how passionate I was about the crocodiles, and certainly Ben, who worked there, was like, it's nice to see someone who's very interested in these as well. It makes our job nicer. So that was nice they've built a bigger enclosure for them apparently, and so that could be something worth checking out when you're back.
Yeah, I've seen that. I remember that place starting up as this little modest thing, but exactly. No, I'd be quite interested to go and see what they've done with the place. Actually.
There's also a place in Ireland in Kilkenny that has some sort of reptile house. But I would like to. For me, if I'd stayed in Ireland, maybe in the future I might do it. I wanted to have a kind of a reptile park as well. That would maybe be something I'd be interested in doing. But hopefully at some stage I'm going to get down to Australia and I'll pop up for a visit, because Darwin has been on my to-do list, just to get up there and see the creatures in the wild.
Well, if you end up coming to Darwin, let me know, and I'll have to throw you in the water with Smorg. So that's like an experience which will stay with you.
Yeah. And the Cage of Death at some stage as well.
Oh, this is Smorg is a lot better than the Cage of Death. Trust me. Right. It's a lot more frightening, actually, is Smorg, because he's like just there.
And do you ever go into the enclosure with him?
Very occasionally, under very strict. We have a set of protocols that we work by, a set of safety protocols, And we try and stick by them. And one is that we never, ever go into the enclosure unless there is no other alternative. And if we do so, there's always at least 2 people. So you've got yourself and you've got a backup person just in case something goes wrong.
Yeah.
So if you go in there by yourself and, you end up falling over and cracking your head or something, that's it. The croc's going to come out and that's the end of you. If you've got a second person there, then they can deal with it. So we tend not to interact. I mean, I interact with Smorg by voice, and he sees me, I signal him, I'll talk to him. I don't need to touch him. I don't need to get in there and do all that stuff, because he's not after that. I'm not after that. So, we just don't touch that kind of thing. We sort of respect him. Yeah, I respect him for. There's a lot of people who interact with crocodiles and snakes and all. They're just going to grab them and wrestle them. And when I was a kid, I wanted to do that same thing as well. But I've reached a point where I think, well, no, I mean, you wouldn't do that with any other animal. You wouldn't go up and manhandle a giraffe, for example. You just don't do that. I mean, you see the animal and you respect the animal, and you have that relationship with it. And so, we've got that sort of relationship with Smorg, and he knows us and we know him and we know where our boundaries lie, and it's all good.
There's one last thing I wanted to say before. It's another funny anecdote. It was a question and then a story, and then I'll let you enjoy the rest of your weekend. If you were to release a crocodile into, let's say, a lake in Ireland, what are the odds of it surviving? Because I heard the only thing that would
is this like an ask? I'm asking for a friend kind of thing.
Yeah, a friend of mine wants to know if he could release. No, but I often wondered what would happen if you released like a fully grown crocodile into like a large lake. Because I actually, just out of curiosity, researched it, and somebody wrote on, I think, Quora, that they could effectively survive as long as their nostrils didn't freeze over. Is that true?
Well, it's more a question of the temperature. Okay. I mean, if the temperature, their core body temperature is what's important. So as long as it doesn't get too cold at night, for example, and they can warm themselves back up again during the daytime, then they're quite happy. If it gets too cold consistently, then it's going to kill them. It doesn't have to freeze. Their nostrils don't have to freeze over. I mean, they will die. And there's been examples of this. Like, there was a crocodile released into a lake in Cyprus, for example, a few years ago. Someone spotted it with a drone. Jeez. And eventually it died because they had a long, prolonged cold snap, and the crocodile died. They found it belly up in the water. And so, they can't tolerate those really cold temperatures. I mean, something like an American alligator, they're more cold adapted, and they can actually survive freezing conditions because they stick their nostrils above the water surface. That's what they're thinking of in that Quora article. But something like a saltwater crocodile, I mean, they're not adapted to those conditions, and they can't survive that. The other problem is food. I mean, there has to be enough food in this lake for them to be able to feed and catch. I mean, crocs can catch fish, but I mean, it depends on the species of fish. There's certain fish they can't catch. They're just too fast for them. And of course, they're never going to breed because there's no nesting materials and the temperatures aren't suitable for it. So it would be a short-term resident, basically.
Yeah. Apparently, there's a whole load of Nile crocodiles. There was like a crocodile farm, and they've just released a whole load of Nile crocodiles. So in Israel, where there shouldn't be crocodiles, there's now like a lake somewhere where there's about 1,000 of them just living there. Have you heard anything about that?
I've heard about this, yes, but only that's about it. I mean, I haven't seen any follow-ups for it. I mean, it was within their historical range.
But it should be,
so,
I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit more. The trouble is, in a lot of these places, their habitat is gone. So within their historical range is historical simply because all of the croc habitat that they needed to survive has been converted into something else, something that humans
like in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. And so even though crocodiles can potentially still live there, there's just not enough resources available for them. They don't have enough space. They don't have enough food. They've got no breeding habitat. And so again, I mean, they can be short-term residents or itinerants.
Yeah.
And you'll see this sometimes. You'll see crocs will move from established populations into these areas. And they might even go and attack someone or choose someone's cattle or goat or whatever because that's the only food that's available. But they can't become established there because all the conditions that they need have gone.
Oh.
So yeah, I mean that's the sort of thing that tends to happen with these releases.
They were concerned that it would be an ecological disaster if these guys had escaped the defunct crocodile farm and escaped into the River Jordan. They reckon that would cause a lot of chaos. But to wrap this story, when I came back from America, I was in a place called Westport House in Ireland, and that's why I was thinking about, could a crocodile survive in Ireland? So I was with my family and also my sister and her family, and we were going around this lake on a train, and it looked like the perfect environment for crocodiles. So I was sitting going backwards on this thing, looking at the lake, thinking, such a shame, man. There's no crocodiles. And then I just looked down, and they had this huge, like, fake crocodile. But I went, ah! And they were like, what the hell's up with you? But I literally jumped out my skin because it was the last thing I expected to see.
Yeah. Someone rang me up from one of the newspapers, the Cairns Post, a couple of weeks ago, and said, he said, what do you think to these new remote-controlled crocodiles that people can get? I said, you'll have to explain. And he said, you can get these remote-controlled crocodile heads. And so, of course, naturally, people are putting them in these places where they're not supposed to be crocodiles and driving them around and scaring the crap out of people who are swimming with their kids. It's like, what could possibly go wrong? I mean, if you give people the means to play a joke like that, then they're going to do so.
I feel some stunts coming on, Adam.
Yeah,
in Ireland.
That's what worries me.
Yeah, but obviously, we've established they would only be short-term residents. But you know what? This has been an absolutely fantastic chat, and thank you very much for coming on. And if you'd like to let people know where they can find you as well, by all means, let them know.
Well, yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to do this. This is my Twitter and this is my Instagram thing here, aren't I? I'm very bad at this.
Yeah, same as myself.
The trouble is I can never remember my username. I mean, I'm on Twitter. I think it's what's my Twitter handle? I think it's at Adam Britton. And then I'm on Instagram as Adam Britton Croc. So if you want to see any croc photos, they're on there.
I'll give you a follow.
Crocodilian.com is my website, although it's now really, really, really out of date, and it's actually quite embarrassing, and really needs totally updating, the whole thing. But we also, I encourage people to go and check out the Crocbite project. So that's one word, CROCBITE. There's a lot of information on there about crocodile attacks, and you can go and have a look at the database, and it's great. And the other thing you can do as well is you can go and have a look at Smorg the Crocodile on Facebook. Smorg has got his own Facebook page, and he does tweet. He does make posts occasionally, usually to do with eating wallabies. So if you're into that kind of thing,
his claws are tapping furiously on the screen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been fantastic, and obviously, I don't think many people knew what a large reptile nerd I am, but it's something that I've been absolutely crazy about since I was a kid. So I
can understand the appeal there.
One last thing, that was it. Bar Brady, do you know him?
You mean Brady Barr?
Brady Barr, sorry, yeah, Brady Barr.
Yeah, I know Brady Barr pretty well, actually.
Oh man, we had such a laugh about 10 years ago watching his laser cam episode. It was the craziest shit I'd ever seen. Like he built this laser cam, which was like two lasers, and which was like each dot was a foot apart. So the idea was they would find big game animals and then calculate the size of the animal. But there's a hilarious bit where he's pulling out this massive crocodile out of a hole, and it looks like the crocodile was in retirement and just wanted to see its last few days out. And they're like, pull him out. And he's with this tourist or this gamekeeper, and the editor just left in a shot of the gamekeeper's face just being really unimpressed, and he's like, pull the purple rope, not the purple rope. But yeah, what's he like in real life?
Yeah, Brady's a character. Yeah, I like Brady. He's got a lot of passion, that's for sure.
Oh, he does indeed.
He's a lot of fun. He keeps it. The last time he was here, he was really looking for. Because I was thinking about him the other day actually, because I've been trying to find a file snake. We've got a film crew that really wants to film a file snake, and it's just like the worst possible time of year to look for file snakes. So I was looking for these file snakes, and I just thought of Brady because when he was here, he's like, I must see a file snake. So
what's
it's
a file snake?
A file snake is this awesome aquatic snake. It looks like a snake that's it's put a snake skin on that's 3 sizes too big. So it's got this flat head with these beady eyes, and it's got this incredibly loose skin, and it's quite rough. So it's almost got its scales are almost like teeth, and it's just an incredible thing. And it catches fish, and it holds the fish in its coils with this loose skin that it's got. And they're just amazing creatures. They've got these tiny little tongues as well. They flick out at you. And Brady really wanted to see one. But unfortunately, I'm not sure if he ever did. He certainly didn't see one with us anyway. We had a few attempts at it.
Are they venomous or?
No, they're non-venomous.
That's a turn up for the books.
They're non-venomous and totally and completely harmless. I mean, they're just like, they just about go to sleep in your hands when you pick them up, which we tend not to do. We sort of watch them moving around, just feeding and looking for fish in the waters here. Really
do you have bull sharks in the Adelaide River?
Yes.
And do you do anything with sharks at all? Have you any interest in them?
Oh, I mean, sharks are fascinating, but I don't really do any research with them. We did a research project a few years ago, which was turned into a documentary. We do a lot of documentaries that turn into research projects because
that's awesome.
It's a good way of getting funding.
Yeah,
I mean, we're a private research organization in effect, so a film crew comes along, and so they can actually fund some of the research that you're doing. So we were able to use these amazing remote data collecting units with cameras on them and put them on the back of crocodiles. And we also had some researchers at the time that were working on sharks, and they were trying to do the same thing with the sharks, so that we could collect some telemetry data on what the animals were doing when they were underwater, and what their behavior was, and whether there were any interactions between them at all.
And is there? Because there
is definitely, and in fact, the ranger that we were working with, he had some drone footage of these crocodiles that were taking the nesting turtles, the green turtles. They're coming up on the beach and nesting, and the crocs are coming up and grabbing the turtles. And the crocs were taking the sea turtles, and then the sharks were coming in and trying to steal bits of meat from the sea turtle carcass, and so they were interacting quite a bit. So we were trying to get some more data on how these animals were interacting, and we were using these transmitters, these data recorders that were also recording video as well. So we got the most amazing video because we caught some crocodiles and put them onto the backs of the crocs. So we got some amazing video of them going in the water and hunting underwater and coming up and scanning the bank and looking for prey.
Wow, so a point of view.
Yeah, point of view of a crocodile. Yeah. The first time anyone had ever put one on a salty, at least. So that was really cool.
What kind of sharks were they? Were they tiger sharks or bull sharks?
There were tiger sharks. There were lemon sharks, reef sharks, hammerheads, something else as well. Which there were quite. I think they'd seen like 8 or 9 species altogether.
Wow!
So they were pretty stoked by what they saw.
Are you near Fraser Island?
No, that's over on the Queensland coast. So now we were doing this around Coburg Peninsula.
Because I remember talking to a guy who'd been backpacking there, and there's cliffs on Fraser Island, and he was saying that when you look down off the cliffs, you can actually see the shadows of the sharks in the water down below. Yeah. So yeah, that like sharks are another exciting thing that I've obviously have big interest with as well. But the age-old question: fully grown salty versus fully grown great white. And then we'll leave it there. Where's your money? I think I've seen a National Geographic
You
show about it.
yeah, we did a show many years ago called Animal Face Off.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I tell you one thing, Matt, you're a busy man in the TV
I
world.
get around on these things.
You
Yeah.
do, fair play to you.
Well, this is always a great opportunity to talk about crocs to people anyway. But no, my money is on the shark.
Yeah.
Well, I think it sort of depends on the context. I mean, if you put a crocodile on the riverbank and you drop a great white shark next to it, my money's on the crocodile. I mean, context is important, is what I'm trying to say. So, I mean, if it's out in the ocean and there's plenty of room for the shark to move around, then absolutely the shark. It's a lot more maneuverable. It can attack from below. I mean, the croc really doesn't have much chance. If it's in a river, if it's in a small, narrow channel, then I think the odds are a little bit more even, but still.
Yeah.
Crocs, the trouble is with something like that, you're comparing apples with oranges, because crocs, they have a specific way of hunting that crocs are very good at and sharks are useless at. But if you put a croc and a shark together in a body of water, then essentially that's what the shark's good at. So, I mean, you're automatically favouring one particular animal. And
the mako shark, oh, sorry,
mako shark. Yeah, mako shark, yeah.
They can apparently swim 30 meters in 1 second.
I'm not sure.
Apparently,
maybe they can. That seems a bit fast.
Yeah, it does, because that's.
But
if
they've got some speed up, then 30 meters a second.
I don't know. That seems a bit. Let me just double check that.
I don't know. It's getting a bit late on a Friday night for my brain to comprehend the potential of that. But I mean, crocodiles can move at the
60 miles an hour.
60 miles an hour. Well, I don't know.
Maybe,
maybe
actually.
they can. Yeah.
And they can use the speed to breach the water, shooting up to heights of 30 feet, which is 9 meters.
You see, one of the things about a lot of this stuff that you find on the internet is they take like the most extreme examples, the most extreme what ifs, and then they use that as they're capable of doing that. I mean, like saltwater crocodiles can grow up to 7 meters long. The fact is, there's only ever been one animal that has possibly got close to 7 meters, but most of them get to 4.5 meters. But it doesn't sound quite so impressive when you say that. So it's on a normal distribution curve. The average size of a male saltwater crocodile is about 4.5 meters. But absolutely, they can get to 5, 6, possibly even once in a century get to 7 meters. But that's not the usual.
Or as my grandmother used to say, Adam, paper doesn't refuse ink.
Yeah,
so you can write whatever you like.
I like that saying.
Yeah. Well, on that note, enjoy your weekend. What are you up to for the weekend?
I've got to go and look for more file snakes. So I'm going to go and have a look at that, and I've got to get the boat ready because we're going to go out next week and look for crocodiles. And the weekend, most of my weekends are sort of preparing for the following week. So, and I might even have some time to relax and have a few beers as well, which is, of course.
I wouldn't expect any less from a man living down under.
Absolutely. I mean, there's if you've got to have one thing I've learned about beers is you've got to have it ice cold. I was never a beer fan in the UK because I never liked warm beer, but so I was take it out of the freezer. Oh God, it's good
in a frozen glass.
Yeah, if it wasn't 11 o'clock at night, I'd possibly have another one. But actually, so you see, I've been having tea. You see, because I'm sort of English originally, but I'm also Australian, so I can have beer followed by tea quite happily. And I mean, people look at me.
Do you get good tea down there, or do you get the?
Oh, you can get some fairly good tea.
I'd say the milk isn't much good in Australia. I remember being down there about 6 years ago, and the chocolate was awful because it's so hot, and I can't imagine that they have much time to process milk before it goes off. So milk, whatever they were using.
We have soy milk or almond milk these days because it doesn't go off quite so much. So
or the UHT stuff.
No, not the UHT stuff. No, that's pretty bad. But, you get used to a different type of eating here. But I have to say, the Vegemite is where it's at. I mean, I used to be a Marmite fan, but no, it doesn't have It's not a patch on Vegemite.
Yeah, I must get myself some Vegemite. I remember I used to hate Marmite as a child, and when I lived in Greece, we were in a shared room, and there was an English girl called Lucy, and she had a jar of Marmite, and then I just found myself getting the acquired taste for Marmite to the point where I'd be like putting my finger in the jar, going, so maybe I was lacking some B12 or something.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, that's hardcore. Once you get to the finger in the jar stage, you've made it.
I don't think we didn't have much back then. There were hard times, but the Aussies were going, "Oh, mate, Vegemite." And I was like, "I've got to try this Vegemite." So there's probably a few places here in Stockholm because there's a lot of Aussies over here. So try and get my hands on some of that stuff if I can.
You should. I wouldn't go straight for the finger in the jar, but I mean, I'd try it's just warm toast, butter with a thin layer. That's the way to do it.
Just like Marmite.
Yeah.
Or Bovril if you're really going old school.
I've never been a Bovril fan. But,
yeah, it's a nice concept, but when you actually drink a cup of hot Bovril, you're like, maybe have a cup of soup instead.
Yeah, exactly. It's like slightly beef flavored water.
Yeah, exactly. It's like just putting a stock cube into a cup of hot water and drinking that.
Well, my dogs are giving me. We want to go outside. Signals. So
I hear you. Well, look, I took the hind legs off a donkey. If I keep going, so but look, thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. And keep in touch.
It's been a lot of fun. I'd be happy to talk again in the future. And if you ever come to Darwin, then let me know, because seriously, I'll be happy to introduce you to Smorg.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be fantastic to see to get that close to a salty. So, tell him I was asking for him.
I will, yes, yeah.
All right, mate. Well, lovely talking to you, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
No worries. Thanks a lot, man.
Very welcome, mate. Bye-bye.